Hi, welcome to Restore 2022. So we are in 2 Samuel 17 and 18. So we're never really told why Absalom rebels against his father. He doesn't seem very happy that David called him back from Hebron, but then spent the next 2 years ignoring him in 2 Samuel 14, verses 31 to 32. His reasons are never explicitly given, although we know of descriptions given in chapter 14. He was a vain man. So the chapter begins with Ahithophel giving Absalom good advice. The previous chapter, so the end of the last verse of chapter 16, ends with, "Now in those days the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the oracle of God. So all the counsel of Ahithophel was esteemed, both by David and by Absalom." So Hushai has a very difficult task ahead of him to convince Absalom not to take Ahithophel's advice, which has already been accepted by Absalom and all the elders in verse 4, and Hushai is probably still suspected of allegiance to David. Hushai gives a very clear and convincing speech. Contrary to Ahithophel, who stressed his own role, note the repetitions of the word I, Hushai gives prominence to Absalom's leadership. So only by assembling a huge army can Absalom prevail over David's courageous men. This highly hyperbolic language, verse 13, is a fitting and successful climax to the speech. Because rejection of Ahithophel's sound advice seemed unthinkable, the narrator ascribes this to the Lord in verse 14. Verses 18 to 20, when the woman hid Jonathan and Ahimaaz in the well, is a very similar story of how Rahab once helped Joshua's spies in Joshua 2, 3-7. So his advice being rejected, Ahithophel commits suicide, probably convinced that David will gain the upper hand now and execute him as traitor. Now at least he can set his affairs in order and be buried in his ancestral tomb. Chapter 18. The battle between the armies of David and Absalom result in Absalom's death. Unlike David, Absalom participates in the battle himself, as suggested by Hushai in 17:11. Absalom, who used to grow his hair and weigh it every year, 14:26, is caught by his hair, or literally his head, indicating that his pride is his undoing. The royal mule deserts the would-be king and leaves him hanging in a tree, which implies he is cursed by God. Verses 10 to 15. So the dialogue between Joab and the man who saw Absalom hanging in the tree underscores Joab's deliberate violation of David's explicit order to deal gently with Absalom. Though Absalom is finally killed by 10 arms bearers, responsibility for his death rests with Joab, who gave the order. Apparently, when Joab fires the 3 javelins or darts, they are actually blunt rods, not meant to kill him, but to dislodge him from the tree. And the heart can mean anywhere in the midsection. So Joab did not want Absalom to have such a clean death. To die by 10 men in this way was a particularly brutal death. To be then flung into a large pit is an act of contempt, and to be buried under a heap of stones is a sign of disgrace. The humiliating pile of stones on his grave is an ironic contrast to the glorious memorial that Absalom had set up for himself in the Valley of the King. And you may pick up here that actually, according to chapter 14:27, Absalom did have children. He had 3 sons and a daughter named Tamar. So we can only assume that they must have all died. This chapter ends with David mourning for his son. Joy over the victory is overshadowed by David's grief over Absalom's death. In spite of what Absalom did to him, David loved his son dearly. This is similar to 1:16 when David is told of Saul's death. Absalom's death is another instance of fulfillment of Nathan's prophecy that the sword will never depart from David's house.